Hi, and thank you for joining us for our sixth class on Jewish philosophy. We're no longer at radiotorah.com, even though that's still our website. We started a new website called eyeshiva.com. We're going to be hosting all our classes from here, and you could access our archived classes here also. Again, my name is Meza, and I'll be teaching you tonight, and we're still in the book. The 9 Questions People Ask About Judaism by Dennis Prager and Rabbi Joseph Tolushkin. We left off on page 54. I hope everyone had a nice week. This week was actually very kind of hectic for us here. I mean, I've been really catching a lot of heat because of this last video. You would think after all this time, and even after the Holocaust, Jews wouldn't be so anti-gun, but go figure. Anyways, that video was taken down. It's not on YouTube, but if you Google it, it's on other sites. Anyways, we left off on page 54. Okay. So we're at peace within ourselves, and we're talking about the Sabbath. Okay. So it reads, one purpose of Sabbath laws is to produce a state of inner peace by having us desist from all work not geared to making the Shabbat holy, and by having us rely on our own minds and bodies. To achieve this state, the Shabbat law's intent is to inhibit non-Shabbat work and the use of external sources of energy. In addition to its general prohibition of work, its prohibitions include the use of a radio, a television, and other machinery. By not watching television or using machinery or otherwise relying on external sources of creativity, people are compelled to return to themselves for creativity. Our creativity on the Sabbath should come from within the human being, not from external sources and not from technology. Thus, for example, one should read but not write. Writing is forbidden because of its reliance upon an external vehicle for creativity, a pen or pencil. When writing, one relies upon the writing implement to create new words. But when reading, all creativity is within a person, his or her mind, since the words have already been created. Also, we rely upon and often become enslaved to external vehicles of creativity, amusement, and so forth, especially in the form of technology. On the Sabbath, however, we must return to ourselves and be liberated from dependence upon technology. While most modern men and women cannot conceive a life without cars, television, or telephone, one who observes the Sabbath revels in such a life. He or she spends 1/7 of his or her life, 10 full years, if he or she lives to be 70, without relying on any of these things. The Sabbath also compels the individual to reflect on the most significant question concerning himself and technology. After spending 6 days at work, creating, utilizing, and expanding technology, the individual is freed on the 7th day to reflect on the question: work and technology, toward what purpose? For what did I work all week? Now, there's a very neat, truthful statement. It's actually very popular. I'm not sure who said it. I've heard many different sources. I think perhaps it was the Israeli author Ahad Ha'am. It says, more than the Jews kept the Sabbath kept the Jews. Now, this, again, it's a very, very true statement. It's basically a statement that we can apply to other areas in our life. That when we choose, or what we choose to keep ultimately ends up keeping us. Keeping us from what? Well, perhaps all the opposite. This goes back to what I said in our last class, the concept of individual moral training. The idea that every mitzvah that we keep, that we choose to keep through subjugation to the Almighty, actually ends up shaping us into holy beings through righteousness. Actually, I remember that even Jesus in the Christian New Testament said it best. He said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. Now, although this is found in the Christian text, it's still a true statement, because although the significance of the Sabbath is divine, it ultimately only exists to instruct us, you and I, on the importance of taking a step back and contemplating, as well as many other things. I mean, that's why it actually says in the Talmud in Sanhedrin 37a that one should live each day saying that the world was created for me. And embracing such an attitude is a good thing, although it may sound a bit narcissistic. But it's not, my friends. But it's actually a statement of love, because it states that all was creating, thus stating that there was a creator, someone higher than me. But not just a creator, but a creator that loved me so much to do this beautiful act for me. My friends, there is so much that could be said about the Sabbath alone. Perhaps there should be, I mean, there have been tons of books just written on these topics. And that's why, like I said in the last class, that the Sabbath day is actually the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Even though it happens every week instead of once a year. It's holier than Yom Kippur. It's holier than Pesach. Why? Because the Torah even says that above all, my Sabbaths you shall keep. And actually, Judaism internalized that commandment to such a level that the keeping of Shabbos has become the deciding factor on whether someone is considered religious or not. How? Because just by keeping the Sabbath, one acknowledges first that God created the world and that our God is the God of the Torah. And this person also acknowledges that we're not mere animals who don't have a concept of an unnatural scheduled day of rest, but rather by keeping the Sabbath, we can relate with God on a personal level, emulating him, thus becoming a partner in creation. All this in just keeping the Sabbath. I mean, that's why even the Shulchan Aruch states that when a Jew refuses to keep the Sabbath, he's actually denying the existence of God, because he's making a public declaration that all we said before is not true. And it even brings down that this individual is worse than an idolater. Let me give you some basis, some background on Shabbos observance. You guys probably already know that Shabbos is kept from Friday night at sundown till Saturday night at sundown. Why? Because it says in the creation story that on the first day there was evening and there was morning. So from this we learn that the day doesn't begin at sunrise, but rather sunset. And this also applies for all Jewish days, not just Shabbos, right? And also, like I said in the last class, that the keeping of Shabbos has always been the litmus test for religious Jewry, right? I mean, actually, traditionally, Shabbos and Kashrus. Because it's no surprise that when someone begins to stray away from Torah observance, the first things to go are Shabbos and Kashrus. Why these two? Well, perhaps because they're the most visible but actually perhaps the hardest to keep. That's why it's been the defining aspect that actually has separated us from groups that try to water us down as Jews. Groups like Reform Judaism or Messianic Judaism. It's actually funny. I mean, sometimes when walking to shul, I see these guys with kippahs, payas, with beards, like walking out of McDonald's. Right? It just kind of looks weird. And I'm talking about Messianic Jews here. Right? I mean, obviously Reform Jews don't wear payas. I mean, they hardly wear kippahs. And, beards, perhaps. Reading on here. let's see how many people we have in the chat room here. Okay, not so bad. Okay. Reading on. Peace between people and nature. The Sabbath laws also ensure that people return to nature and not abuse it. To achieve this peaceful state with nature, the Sabbath law's intent is to prevent any tampering with nature. Both creation and destruction are prohibited on the Sabbath. As examples, one should not start a fire, therefore no smoking or cooking on the Sabbath, or extinguish a fire which already exists. Unless, of course, it's potentially destructive. Nor plant a tree, creation, or tear a leaf from a tree, which is destruction. For one day each week, specific Sabbath laws ensure that we do not rule over nature, just as other laws ensure that on this day we do not rule over fellow human or animals. Actually, you know what? I think I skipped peace between people. Okay. Well, just let me comment on this one anyways. About when it says, for one day each week, specific Sabbath laws ensure that we do not rule over nature, just as other laws ensure that on this day we do not rule over fellow human beings or animals. Okay, so here, this point that it's bringing down, that says do not rule over fellow human beings, I would like to add, or be ruled by them, right? Because in Exodus, it actually teaches us that Jews are commanded that when it says, remember Zachor, the Sabbath day, because in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested. But also in Deuteronomy it says that the Jews were instructed to guard. It says shamor, to guard the Sabbath day. Why? Because it says that you were slaves in Egypt, and our God brought you out with a mighty hand. So, about remembering Zachor, we explained that that this is dealing with the idea that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So Zachor means that we must constantly remember creation and thus acknowledge that God is the creator. And Shamor, guard, well, actually, by the way, the reason that women actually light 2 candles on the Sabbath are for these 2 instances that this appears in the Torah. 1 candle to signify remembering, and 1 candle to signify guarding. So anyways, the idea that he brought us out of Egypt with an outstretched arm, what does that have to do with the Sabbath? Well, because by guarding the Sabbath day, we acknowledge that we are no longer man's servant, but God's servant. Because actually, a slave or a servant cannot willingly choose to do nothing his master doesn't approve of. Right? So, by guarding it, it ensures our freedom from earthly bondage. And not freedom, how many erroneously interpret the Exodus story as some sort of biblical Woodstock, but rather free from the house of bondage so that we can dwell in the presence of the Almighty. In other words, if we fail to guard Shabbos, we will go back to the house of bondage. And this really sums up our existence as Jews, to remember that God created the world and guard the ability and privilege he has bestowed on us to keep his holy instructions freely and not break them, lest he makes us captives again. I mean, that's actually where we are now. We're in Gullus. Why? Because we failed to keep the Sabbath, and not only the Sabbath laws, but Torah properly. And that's like many of the reasons that people who don't agree with the existence of a Jewish state. That's one of the reasons they say if we were kicked out initially for not keeping the Sabbath, by stumbling in idolatry, and not being that light that God chose us to be, and thus God threw us out of the land, what's going to happen now? I mean, are we more religious people now, even after the Holocaust? I don't think so. But to backtrack one section back, because I just skipped this, where it says actually being. Okay, right. Peace between people. By ensuring that we refrain from reliance upon the inanimate, Sabbath laws compel us to seek relationships with the animate. First ourselves, then our families and friends. We who have experienced the Sabbath can testify to one nearly universal consequence of Sabbath observance: the strengthening of family unity and friendships. Those who observe the Sabbath invariably do so with family and or friends. The Sabbath laws, by prohibiting technology or by prohibiting technological companionship, compels us to seek human companionship. The Sabbath meals are also a typical example. The Friday night meal in a home which observes the Sabbath is a lengthy one, at which all participants sing and speak for hours on end. Unlike the rest of the week, no one has another appointment to run to, or other engagements after the meal. If the talk is stopped to watch a basketball game or go to a movie, this means that basketball and movies are more significant than family discussions and Judaism. When we speak about the effects of the lengthy Friday night meal on the family, people often react with envy and the feeling that in their families it would not work. They question whether their family would find enough to talk about for 2 or 3 hours. A question which is unfortunately a valid one for most people today. A common symptom of the contemporary breakdown of family life is the inability of members to communicate with one another on matters of any importance. The Sabbath serves, therefore, not only as a day of reunion and elevation for a family, but also as a day that challenges a family to confront a question which many families prefer to avoid. Can the family members communicate with one another? Parents and children relate better in a family that observes the Sabbath. And as regards the husband-wife relationship, the benefits of the Sabbath are profound. This actually touches on something I said last week about the purpose of being Jewish and how there is no point in being Jewish if you're going to be alone. And that's actually one of the main reasons the rabbi won't convert you, right? Because he won't convert you unless you live near walking distance to a synagogue, because you can't fulfill your duties properly as a Jew if you don't live near a synagogue or near other Jews, right? And also, like what this says about family and being forced to spend time with one another. I mean, it really resonates with me. It probably resonates with you if you weren't raised Jewish. Because unlike religious Jews, I didn't grow up like this. And maybe, again, you didn't either. And thinking about it, I mean, I don't really think I ever really spoke to my parents, at least about anything that actually mattered. I mean, the TV was always on or someone was working, right? But actually, when I experienced my first Sabbath meal with a family, I was so awed. I saw families sitting, eating, singing, laughing together. I knew I had to bring this to the rest of the world. And I had to tell people that I knew that there was a better way. And they, by embracing the Sabbath, and not just the Sabbath, but Judaism, could give their children something better, something that perhaps their parents didn't give them. And why didn't their parents give it to them? Well, perhaps because their parents didn't give it to them. Why? Because Judaism and even the Sabbath goes against the grain, you know? And we even have groups today who have capitalized on the idea of the Sabbath. Groups like the Mormons, who actually practice a weekly family night, which you can obviously see where they took it from. I mean, they took it from the Sabbath, but that's perfectly fine. I mean, they still reap the rewards. And honestly, this is funny. If I honestly had to become any religion within Christianity, I mean, I think, you know what? Yes, I think I would become a Mormon. What? Just, I mean, I don't know about you, but, I mean, apart from their wacky Joseph Smith theology, I mean, I'll tell you what, I've come to realize that Mormons are actually the nicest people I've ever met. It's, again, apart from their wacky, I mean, theology, it really does no justice for their character. Right, but I mean, again, I think I mentioned in the last class why Christianity in America has done so good with missions to the hungry and clothing the naked and so on in other countries. It's not because of Christian theology, but it's actually because of America. Right? I mean, this country just has an ability to bring the best out of people and religions, which is actually my theory why Mormons are actually so sweet, right? Why? Because, I mean, if you've ever thought about it, Mormonism, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is the all-American religion, right? I mean, their holiest spot is a mountain in New York, and I think they even think that Zion is in Minnesota somewhere, right? And their holy temple is in Salt Lake City, Utah. Hold on. 2, 1, 2. Sorry about that, guys. But actually, I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are also right. I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses are also an all-American religion, and not to mention conservative Judaism, which was also founded in this country. Let me see. Okay, so we're kind of moving on a little here. We're right now on page 59, right? Because I read. Actually, no, we're not on page 59. Hold on, I'm confused here. For one answer. Okay, great. Hold on. Where did I leave off? Let's start at D. Okay, right. Okay. So we're page 57. Peace between people and God. The Sabbath, the Torah tells us, is to God. I'm sorry. Well, it says the Sabbath, the Torah tells us, is to God. Okay. All week we concern ourselves with what we want. But on the Sabbath, we reflect on what God wants of us. The Sabbath is God's day. This is the ultimate Sabbath goal, because it can be attained only once we have begun to realize peace between ourselves and our fellow human beings, peace between ourselves and nature, and peace within ourselves. Only when we have started to achieve peace with this world are we free to transcend ourselves and approach God. This is accomplished in at least 3 ways: prayer and meditation, study of Torah, and sanctifying the day. Life is composed of the material and the spiritual. During the week, the material dominates. But the Sabbath is a day on which matter is relegated to the background and the spiritual brought to the foreground. During the Sabbath, 25 hours in which time, not space, is sanctified. Man is given an opportunity to relate to the one who has no body and is composed of no matter. So now it's going to talk about kashrus. While Sabbath practice is usually ignored but seldom disparaged by modern Jews. I'm going to read that again. While the Sabbath practice is usually ignored but seldom disparaged by modern Jews, a practice that is often both ignored and disparaged is kashrus, keeping kosher. Ask most Jews whether dietary laws of kashrus exist, and you're likely to receive the authoritative reply: it was a health measure. For example, pigs were avoided to avoid this word here, trichinosis. But with modern day health codes, we certainly don't need measures like that today. Friends, unfortunately, this common opinion is an example of the law of ignorant opinions authoritatively stated, which posits that in politics and religion, the less a person knows, the more authoritatively he speaks. Worse yet, the view of kashrus is reflected of a greater error regarding Jewish law. It seems that many Jews are convinced that Jewish dietary law does not constitute an ethical code, but is really a health code. They contend that kashrus was instituted to prevent disease, the Sabbath to keep us rested, circumcision to prevent cervical cancer, and so forth. It happens that the laws of kashrus fall into 4 categories of Jewish law and are saturated with ethical meaning. The major purposes of kashrus are: 1. To limit the number of animals the Jew is permitted to kill and eat, thus reflective and ethical. 2. To render the slaughter of the permitted animals as painless as possible, thus ethical. 3. To cause revulsion at the shedding of blood, thus reflective and ethical. 4. To instill self-discipline in the Jew, reflective. 5. To help sustain Judaism and the cohesion of the Jewish community, national. And 6. To raise the act of eating from an animal-like level, thus holiness. Now, here in 6, when he says to raise the eating from an animal-like level to holiness, one really has to put this in perspective. I'm sure you understand that it is obvious that just by unconsciously eating kosher, one does not perform a righteous act or become holy in any way. In other words, if someone thinks, or actually someone shouldn't think, that if he or she has no other choice but to eat kosher, and in any other circumstance that person would instead eat treif, that the act of that person eating something kosher would constitute in them having a credit in keeping a mitzvah in any way. For example, like in Israel, or at least in Jerusalem, someone really has to go out of their way to eat a non-kosher meal. Now, this doesn't mean that just by simply going with the flow, you will automatically be at a higher level because there's no non-kosher food to eat. No. This may sound obvious to you, but the vast majority of Jews actually disagree with me on this. That's why I never really understood the idea of groups going around putting on tefillin on secular Jews who really don't care for Torah, and if they do it out of superstition. Friends, if our heart is not in the mitzvah, we don't get credit for it, and ultimately it has no purpose. We also see this with how many religious Zionists think that if we get the vast majority of Jews to live in the state of Israel, we could sort of force God to bring the Messiah. Or how many Breslovers think that by saying Nana Nachman Meuman, this acts like a simon, like a good luck charm. It's actually really silly, and it dilutes Torah. And I don't have to remind you that this is not Judaism, but this is unfortunately what many Jews have become. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that if somebody, let's say, embodies the commandments in such a way that he would be doing mitzvah after mitzvah in such a volume that he could not be conscious of them all, that one cannot attain holiness in this way, because actually this is the highest level that one should strive to be. Actually, what the Rav Soloveitchik wrote about in Halachic Man, like the idea was that one, by being engulfed in Torah and in the ethical teachings within it, loses consciousness and actually begins to perform in autopilot, just because he's so engulfed in it that every act he does is an act of halakha. He is able to leave common daily proper etiquette, let's say, and be transformed into a man who is only views the world through the lenses of Judaism. Right? So, I mean, this is not an exception to the previous rule, but it's actually a new rule in general. Right? I just lost my train of thought. Well, in contrast, like what I just said is not the same as if someone was dropped into a situation, like I said in Jerusalem, where the person initially would not have the desire to keep kosher, but rather because the mitzvah has been thrust upon them, that they would get benefit or credit for that mitzvah in any way. Because if it's common sense, if you bend the stick long enough through pressure, it will take that shape. But if, let's say, the stick was bent to begin with and there was no pressure, or there was no change, or at least some reinforcement, that individual would get no credit for those mitzvahs, right? I mean, there's a huge difference. But anyways, moving on. E. We're on the top of page 59. The earliest of Judaism's dietary laws is the ban on eating meat with blood in it. According to Professor Jacob Milgram, surprisingly, none of Israel's neighbors possess this absolute and universally binding blood prohibition. Blood is everywhere partaken of as food. Man has a right to nourishment, not to life. Hence, the blood, which is a symbol of life, must be drained, returned to the universe, to God. The unique practice of draining blood from meat consumed by Jews has had over thousands of years a profoundly moral impact. It has helped produce an extraordinary antipathy to bloodthirst. One example, in addition to the uniquely low incidence of violence among Jews, has been the virtual non-existence of hunting for sport amongst Jews. I don't think I agree with him so much here. Well, first, let me let me give you some background on this. I'm sure you know this already, but Jews typically wait 6 hours between eating meat and milk, right? Also, German Jews wait 3 hours, and Dutch Jews wait 1 hour, right? And you don't have to wait between eating dairy and meat, unless it's hard cheese. But typically for regular dairy, you drink some water and you're good to go. So, what the point I really wanted to bring up here was the idea of hunting, right? I sort of let it go when he said it last time, right? But being that, I mean, he's not giving up on the issue, I think I got to give my 2 cents on this one. First, let me start off by saying that there's nothing halachically wrong with hunting. Now, this doesn't mean that the meat is kosher for consumption, because it's not. But let's say if it's to give it to your meat, or if you're going to do something constructive through hunting, either for the animal's pelt or for keeping the population of deer down so there will be less accidents on the road, it's perfectly fine in Judaism. As a matter of fact, it's really a shame that we have people today who are so actually anti-hunting, but yet consume so much meat. I mean, it's clear hypocrisy. I think if people are going to consume meat, they should either slaughter some of their own meat, or go out and hunt and kill and process some of that meat for their animals, so they could really realize where the meat's coming from. Right? I think I heard Dennis Prager say once that a good way to explain this idea is that when someone purchases meat in a supermarket, it should have a picture of the cow, right? Because you're not eating, you're no longer just eating meat. You're eating, someone's pet. Something that was alive. And actually, what I also heard Dennis Prager sort of change his tune on this when he interviewed a hunter on his show who kind of explained the ethical ideal of hunting. Now, obviously, if you just shoot the animal for fun and just let it die and rot there, then that's clearly against Judaism and Torah. Or even torture it in any way, like they do in bullfighting. That falls right under Sar Balechaim, which many people confuse as hunting in itself, but really means to torture an animal. But actually, the main chet for this comes down from the Notah Yehuda. I mean, you can look it up online. But I also have a video online talking about hunting and the halachas behind it, and I give what the actual place where you can pick up. It's in the book called the Notah Yehuda. It was named after the book. But even, we could go back to biblical days. We see in the Torah that many of the coverings for the utensils that were used in the temple were made from skins of non-kosher animals. So that means that Israelites also hunted for constructive purposes. And what I also disagree here with Dennis Prager or Joseph Talishkin on the idea that, like when he says that most Jews are not violent nowadays because of that, because they don't hunt or like because of the separation of meat and dairy, right? I mean, like perhaps that may be true for religious Jews, but I really don't see that for secular Jews. Right? I mean, I don't think that right? It's. I mean, actually, I think the vast majority of Jews are pacifists nowadays, perhaps because they had weak fathers and masculine mothers. And again, it's like 9 out of 10 of these type of Jews are not religious and don't care about Torah or keeping kosher at all. And I mean, that's actually a problem that I try to bring up a lot. That people confuse Jews with Judaism, right? I mean, Sheldon, the accountant, does not in the slightest way resemble the heroes we read about in the story of the Maccabees or the Roman War, and like in the book of Josephus, or men like King David and Judah Maccabee. I mean, not the rapper, but the warrior. And men like Bar Kokhba, that the Talmud even states that could uproot a tree with one hand while sitting on his horse. And even when it states that 80% of Rome's legions had to be in the land of Israel to control the Jews because they were such a religiously violent people. No, I mean, what happened is that we have become domesticated, which is fine as long as we don't faint at the sight of blood. But, anyways, reading on. On this basis, or on the basis of this law, Judaism enacted another dietary law to protect animals from human cruelty: the ban on eating a limb from a living animal. This had been a common practice, but Judaism not only prohibited Jews from engaging in it, it made this prohibition one of the 7 moral laws the children of one of the 7 laws of the children of Noah, to which all mankind is bound to. The next expression of Judaism's application of morality to eating animals constitutes the essential moral meaning of kashrus. Keeping kosher is Judaism's compromise with its ideal of vegetarianism. Ideally, according to Judaism, man would confine his eating to fruits and vegetables, and not kill animals for food. In the Garden of Eden, Judaism's depiction of utopia, man was commanded to be a vegetarian. Genesis chapter 1, 28 through 29. Now, it's weird. I mean, there's actually a midrash that states that an angel would come down weekly and slaughter for Adam and Eve so they could eat on the Sabbath. But, I mean, whatever. It's not so important. I'm just like bringing it up just to make it clear that the rabbis are not completely in line with this with this statement that Adam was a vegetarian. And also, actually, okay, anyways. All right, reading on. The future kingdom of God on earth is also depicted as one in which all creatures will be vegetarian. This is in Isaiah 11:7. However, Judaism did not legislate its vegetarian ideal. There are two probable reasons. A vegetarian diet was nutritionally difficult, if not impossible. And in any case, it would not have been observed, since meat eating was an innate desire. Jewish law did not completely ban meat eating, but severely restricted it and made it more humane. The Torah refers negatively to meat eating as a craving to which concessions must be made. That's in Deuteronomy 12, verse 20. On the basis of this verse, the Talmud states, the Torah teaches a lesson in moral conduct, that man shall not eat meat unless he has a special craving for it. That's in Hulin 84a and Sanhedrin 59b. Yeah. I don't think I agree with this totally. I mean, he spoke about the Messianic age and how all the creatures will be vegetarian, right? Creatures, he's including humans here. I mean, it does say. I mean, the prophet states that the lion will eat grass like the ox. But again, I mean, like, we're also taught that sacrifices are going to be reinstituted, and the majority of sacrifices in the temple were eaten. So, I mean, I'm not sure, but yeah. But anyways, like the Rambam brings down that one should only eat meat on Shabbos and not during the week. So, I mean, that if it's an ideal, okay. I mean, I would have to think about it there. Okay, reading on. The Jewish ideal is that we not kill for food. Okay. Its compromise, known as kashrus, places a strict limit on the number of animal species which a Jew may kill to eat, and legislates a unique, humane manner in which to kill the permitted animals. The Jewish people is not permitted to kill every animal its members want to eat. This is one reason why the Torah mentions the word holy every time it mentions kashrus. The animals that are permitted or kosher to Jews to eat are identified by certain characteristics. A land animal must chew its cud and have a split hoof. A fish must have both fins and scales, and a bird must not be a bird of prey. Since these characteristics alone determine which animals are kosher, one cannot speak of a Jewish taboo on pigs or on any other particular animal. Pig is non-kosher solely because it does not chew its cud, not because it is dirty or for any other reason. To underscore this point, a medieval commentator on the Torah, the Or HaChaim, wrote that the pig is named Chazir because one day God will Yachzir will make the pig permitted by returning its missing component that it doesn't chew the cud. This is on his commentary on Leviticus 11:14. Now here, on this comment on the from the Or HaChaim, actually goes against his idea that we would be vegetarians in the Messianic age, because like the idea that the pig would have his missing component returned to him, which is the fact that now pigs don't chew their cud, but they will in the Messianic age, meaning that it will be permitted for us to eat, meaning that we'll be eating in the Messianic age. Let me see if I can answer some of your questions here. Okay. But if anyone has any questions, go ahead and ask them. But I'm going to see if anything was asked. Here's a question. If I buy meat that is not killed in a kosher way, should I not eat it anyways, even though it took the blood out afterwards? Right. I mean, you can't eat it even though... I mean, I've seen many Christians do that, actually. I mean, like many Messianic Jews who try to observe the laws of kashrus. Literally. Right? So they buy meat from Walmart or from their supermarket, and they just kosher it with kosher salt and everything, but it's still not kosher because the animal is not slaughtered in a proper way. But yeah, let's see. Let's say if the blood, let's say I took the blood out of a steak. Can I eat steaks that are medium rare? Does the blood in medium rare count as blood, or just merely count as juice from the meat? Right, it counts just as juice of the meat. I mean, in Hilchos Malacha, right? In Hilchos Malicha, it talks about that any meat or any blood that appears on the meat after the salting process is considered mere juice. It loses its status of blood once you've taken the proper precautions according to halacha to extract the blood. There's many different sources on how to take the blood out. I mean, even the Rambam talks about the process of chalita, which many people don't practice today, perhaps Yemenites do, about apart from just salting the meat, it has to be singed with hot water. But right, I mean, there's no problem with eating meat that's medium rare, or even liver, which is, I mean, basically all blood. Right, I mean, liver does have to be roasted. I mean, it can be cooked in a regular way, but right, any other meats, I mean, like but any other blood doesn't have to be washed off. So, like, if you buy meat in a kosher store and it happens to be bloody, I mean, don't feel that you have to wash that blood out in order to eat it. It's still kosher. It's not really considered blood. Let's see. Right. All right. I mean, I think I'm just going to end today, just so I could give some time for Rabbi Kalikowski's next class. Rabbi Kalikowski is giving a class after this on Kabbalah and Hasidus. And don't miss Rebbitzin Kalikowski's class Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock. At 8 o'clock on Kashrus. And the Rabbi's class Wednesday night on the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Right? The Rabbi also has a class Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on the book To Be a Jew. Okay? Thanks for joining me, and be blessed.